So let's jump into it. My name is Emily. I'm with Venture Partners at CU Boulder. I'm joined by my colleagues Sarah and Cathy, who I will have introduce themselves in a second. But we've kind of flipped the script for this month's Ask the Expert and are turning it back on ourselves, representing 3 campuses within Colorado, to kind of help demystify what it takes to go from idea and invention through to commercialization and a venture or a licensing opportunity, and getting your deep tech inventions, your deep tech research off campus and into the world. So let's go ahead and jump into it. We will start with introductions. We'll go through some considerations from the very start of how to think about your intellectual property, how that works within a university setting, through to resources and programs, as well as some kind of mindset ideas of what it takes to start your commercialization journey, start getting your technology out of the lab. We'll then move into standing up a true company, whether that's a small business, a startup, a licensing entity, and really how to bring that startup, that venture off campus and into the real world. And lastly, we'll round out with some funding opportunities that are available on our respective campuses, as well as within the state of Colorado and nationally. So as I mentioned, my name is Emily. I lead venture development at Venture Partners at CU Boulder. We work to bring the most innovative and impactful technologies through the university and, like I keep mentioning, out into the real world. I'll go through a little bit more of the programs we have available, both for CU Boulder affiliates as well as for the broader venture community as we start chatting. So Cathy, I would love for you to introduce yourself next.
Okay, thank you so much, Emily, and welcome everyone. So my name is Cathy Bodine, and I have an interesting set of roles within the University of Colorado. In short, I'm both a faculty member and also a member of the Colorado Clinical and Translational Sciences Institute, where I lead what we call the innovation ecosystem for the Institute. And we'll talk more about the different things that we do there as we go along today. But my other role is as a professor in the Department of Bioengineering in the College of Engineering. And I have joint appointments in physical medicine and rehab, pediatrics, and orthopedics. So I'm a crossover between the School of Engineering and the School of Medicine. So I see it from both sides and really have a passionate interest in seeing how we can improve healthcare, health outcomes, and quality of life for folks who are dealing with a variety of issues along the way. So that's how I kind of come into this, and we'll talk more as we go forward about the industry components.
Thanks, Cathy. And Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Hibbs-Shipp. I am the Director of Communications for the Colorado State University Research Foundation, which houses what most of you know of as CSU Ventures, which is technology transfer for the Colorado State University system. And so as you can see, we have Emily at CU Boulder, and we have Cathy with CCT-SI, and the Innovation Core is at Anschutz. CSU Ventures and CSURF, we actually exist outside the university, and we serve all of the campuses within the CSU system. So we hold the technology transfer activities and strategic real estate services and some financing programs for CSU Pueblo, CSU Global, and CSU in Fort Collins. And so we have many licensing directors, actually 3, I should probably not say many, but 3 that serve all 3 campuses and deal with the intellectual property that comes in and innovation and commercialization, startups, and I'm excited to be here today. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Cathy. Thanks, Sarah. As you can tell, between the 3 of us, we have quite a few campuses covered. We have some different industry expertise, some different kind of personal or career backgrounds. I will say throughout this whole webinar, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. We would love to address those as they come up. We will also leave some dedicated Q&A time at the end of this session. But without further ado, let's jump into it. commercializing your deep tech inventions. So we wanted to start with IP considerations and really what it means to work as a researcher at a university, or even if you're not affiliated with the university, what to look for as you start thinking about IP, as you start thinking about your research and how to protect your technology. So Sarah, I'd love to start with you. Can you talk a little bit about how CSU, and you said you represent all of the different campuses within the system. Maybe first what technology transfer is, what licensing directors do in your campus, and really when you like to first talk to folks on campus that are looking to protect their IP.
Sure. So we handle all forms of intellectual property that is developed and owned by any of the universities within the Colorado State University system. And when we say intellectual property, many of you on today's webinar may know what that means, but we are talking about ideas, knowledge, methods, materials, programming, widgets, anything that can be protected by the university, either through a trademark or a copyright or a patent. And our goal is to work with the university and protect, and the researchers, and protect that piece of intellectual property, and then find somebody who has the resources and the desire to really take it to the next level and commercialize it. And if the technology is pretty cutting edge, and we do have the resources a little more locally to actually do a startup, we will support startup foundation and creation around that piece of intellectual property. And so from a knowledge perspective of when you get involved, that is sometimes at the very onset of the idea. And so there's a lot of just coming in and talking to the licensing directors that we have, or anybody in the office, about what the idea is, whether or not there might be a commercial audience for it, or if we have programming available, or one of our partners that, in my screen at least, are on each side of me, are available, what programming they have at the university level to be able to support the formalization of that idea creation and turning it into a product or a program or a service, and what sort of the outlook is for how successfully we might be able to commercialize it. It's never too early to talk to the tech transfer office, and I believe this is true at any of the universities. At the worst, what we would say is that is a really great idea, but you need to do some work on it in these areas. Come back in about a year and tell us more what happened. And at the absolute best, right, we sort of fall out of our chairs and we go, oh my God, that is, you are there. Let's make sure we get it protected as quickly as absolutely possible. And so at least at CSU, and within the system, we have 3 licensing directors: Steve Foster, Jillian Lang, and Jesse McGowan, and they work with any number of our inventors and innovators to figure that concept out. We have an inventor portal that you go to through our website to at least initially submit the idea. It doesn't bind you to working with us, but it does give us enough information so that we can effectively use your time in having a conversation about what the innovation might be. And then we also have Jim Poss, who is our managing director of venture creation, and he works with our startups. And so once the intellectual property comes in and it's formalized and it's something that we can handle, then the next discussions turn into whether or not there's a startup or whether or not it's we try to find a commercialization partner. So, and I would assume it's similar at each respective university tech transfer, while it has some nuances, is pretty standard across the concept. So.
Right. Thanks, Sarah. Cathy, do you have anything to add with how Anschutz handles IP, or did Sarah pretty much cover it?
Oh, you're muted, Cathy.
My apologies. Yes, you did a great job, Sarah, and I have to confess, I got kicked off the system for a few seconds, so I didn't hear everything you said. But one of the things that I can speak to for CU Innovations here on who's located on the Anschutz campus is that we have a nice portal that you can go online and do what's called an Invention Disclosure and submit your innovation online so that it can have a nice review by our folks within CU Innovations as an early start. And it's really important, I think, for faculty to understand that just because you submit your idea as a disclosure, it doesn't mean that you're going to be forced to go for a patent or anything like that, but rather, how can we best protect you so that someone doesn't scoop your idea? And so you get a very good review. And as Sarah said, then hopefully everyone falls out of their chair and is so delighted that they offer you scads of money. Yeah, I think that's how it works, right?
We hope.
We're here to tell you how to make that be the case. You all are in luck. That's great. And I really like the emphasis from both of you and with CU Boulder and our group venture partners as well. There are people available just to have conversations. You don't need to feel like you're up against the USPTO or, trying to figure this out on your own. And an early conversation never hurts. I know we do the same thing with Invention Disclosures. That connects you with somebody that will help walk you through the process and understand how that works, especially being an on-campus employee. I know one of our best practices or kind of best advice is at the latest, you should have these conversations and start that patent process well before, or at least a bit before any sort of public disclosure. So if your lab is looking to publish a research paper, if you're having any non-confidential conversations, getting that protection in place is important because you might not even be able to pursue that opportunity once that technology, that invention is publicly disclosed.
Yes, a really good point, Emily. And that is something I will say that there are many researchers and lifelong academics that think that commercialization and research are at odds with each other. And they are absolutely not at odds with each other. It is simply that they are two different paths towards getting your research or your innovation or your program out into the public. And you can do one by publishing and going to conferences and getting your journal articles out there. And you can also do it in a secondary pathway of making it a commercial viable product. And in terms of being able to patent something, if you're an engineer or a pharmaceutical developer or someone who has a really unique method, and we don't think about that very often, but some very tremendously unique and groundbreaking methods for accomplishing your research can also be patented or be provided as a license and a service. Those need to be disclosed before you make them public knowledge. I think everyone would agree that if you can find it on the internet and they're not going to charge you for it, then it's free, right? It's just knowledge that's out there and you can use it. And so every university has a federally required right and charge mandated by the federal government to do what they can to reinvest those federal dollars that are coming in for research into commercial products. And so while we do this in an effort to get money to come back into the university as well, but we also do it because it is legally required. And so while we would love there to be options, I guess I could say, in some ways, it is federally mandated, just like reporting on any federal grant. And so it is our best effort to help you be more successful.
That's really well said, Sarah. And I think to add to that, because I think there's also a little bit of misunderstanding when it comes to National Institutes of Health, National Science Foundation, even the National Academy of Medicine, they kind of step back, I don't know, after the Bayh-Dole Act passed, and they kind of stepped back maybe 10 years ago and they said, wait a minute, we're putting billions of dollars into research. but what happens to it? And if we finish a grant or a research project and we just put it on the shelf, then we really don't benefit mankind. And so even at this level, at the National Institutes of Health, National Science Foundation, they're now saying, wait a minute, let's get this stuff out the door. Let's have an impact. And so a tremendous amount of what brings the three of us here today is based on the fact that these federal granting agencies are asking for this to happen. And as Sarah said, they're also mandating in a number of ways that we do this, but there's a real passion behind this at these high levels within our federal funding offices.
Mhm.
And so,
Yeah, thanks for that, Cathy. Well, and I think it's some real traction, especially within our universities and within the state of Colorado. There's this federal support for commercialization. There's also state level support, state level funding opportunities that we'll get to a little bit later in this conversation, and some really, really cool success stories coming out of our three respective universities and other national labs, institutions across our state. So trying to bring some of the excitement of commercialization as well as the logistics here. Maybe a question to go along with this conversation from an anonymous attendee. If we could discuss sponsored research agreements across these and their ability to become an exclusive or non-exclusive license.
So I can give an overview to that, but I have to couch it in the statement that every sponsored research agreement is different. And depending on who the granting agency is or who the sponsor of that research agreement is, there will be different requirements in it for intellectual property, licensing, and commercialization, what you can and cannot do with that research and that funding. For instance, I do know that there are many USDA grants that say whatever intellectual property is developed as part of that grant cannot be used for commercial profit-bearing purposes, and it has to be public domain, open. That doesn't mean you can't license it, but it means you can't, like, I don't know, if Coca-Cola wanted to come take a database that you developed, you actually cannot allow them to do that. But if the University of Wyoming or Harvard or Stanford, or I don't know, pick any number of our collaborators wanted to use it for research purposes, they could. And then you do a license. Usually it's non-exclusive to those entities to use whatever that product is, that piece of intellectual property. When the licenses are more open, when the funding is more open and that's not part of the grant wording or the sponsored wording, then whether or not you offer someone an exclusive or non-exclusive license often just depends on what they're bringing to the table and what they want. So for instance, we have a cardiac, we actually have a mitral valve tethered system that was initially developed at the vet school to fix a mitral valve problem, hoping to fix it in canines. And Abbott Industries came and wanted to license it for commercial use for them. And so they have an exclusive license to that. And it's now the foundational intellectual property for the Tendyne mitral valve system that's approved for use in Europe to solve mitral valve problems in humans. And they brought to the table, did all the commercialization, wanted an exclusive license. They got an exclusive license. Otherwise, it would not have been commercialized. So those discussions happen at the licensing director level and sort of with the university as to what the benefits and drawbacks are within that, and whether or not there are specific rules in the agreements that come through the Office of Sponsored Programs. So as part of that granting. And I don't know if it's different, Emily, with you or Cathy with you at Anschutz, but definitely grants come into OSP here at CSU. And we do get asked often to review the IP sections to ensure that we can clearly know whether it will end up being co-owned CSU IP or all CSU owned IP, or if it's all owned by the sponsoring agency and they get all the licensing for free because they're paying for the research. So that starts at that initial granting stage.
Yeah, that's a great answer. It's a good kind of caveat to make sure that you're reading through this and also that you're working with your licensing directors at your universities, because they will help you decipher this, understand the uses for this as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
Perfect. All right, so we've talked a little bit about IP, maybe a very high level overview of when to start thinking about protecting that and who to talk to work on that. So let's take our first little toe dip into commercialization. And I think the biggest phrase that you hear as researchers and that we tout as kind of program developers and startup supporters is the idea of product market fit. This is critical across any sort of entrepreneurial handbook, any sort of startup advice, but in my mind is especially crucial for those of you building either hard tech, deep tech, these types of inventions that take a lot of resources, a lot of time, a lot of money. It's not necessarily a software program that you can code and recode in the matter of weeks. So this idea of product market fit, this idea that there is somebody out there in the world that your product is addressing something that they need and they're willing to pay money to have that need addressed, is really the most critical first step in thinking about building a company. I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see with early stage researchers is if we spend all of these resources, time, money, energy, building this technology, it is so cool, it is so mind-blowing, we don't need to do anything, somebody will come and pick it up because it is that great. I'm sure it's happened. It's pretty rare, and really provides an extra risk to the time that you're putting into building this, the time that the university is putting into supporting this, the time that the NSF and the NIH and money that they're putting into developing this. So we really focus in on product market fit as the first and most important criterion of building a startup, a small business, a licensing operation. So we're going to talk a little bit about some programs that are available, how you kind of take that first step into understanding your market and understanding if you have product market fit. But first, I want to pause and see if there's anything that you, Cathy, and Sarah have to add to this idea.
Oh, I could talk for 3 days on this idea because to me, it's the most critical link. And I think to kind of ping on something that Emily just said, everyone, all of us, everyone here is incredibly bright, and we have a lot of great ideas. And sometimes it can be so deeply embedded in our minds that our idea is so wonderful and perfect that we can overlook really basic, simple things. And so customer discovery and really understanding your market are two of the most important things that you can do. And the first thing to understand is how big is the market, like who might potentially be interested in something like this. And it's one thing to say X million people have type 2 diabetes in the United States or around the world. It's another thing to say how many people within that group my product will support. We like to think that we're going to save the world with everything we do, but it turns out we don't always have that capability. And so really narrowing in and focusing on who those customers really are. The other thing that I think is so important, not only how big the market share might be, but also who is your customer. And it's not always the patient. It's not always who we think the customer is going to be. And so sometimes the customer is the procurement officer at an industry that is going to make all the decisions on the purchase. And so I'm going to stop there because I want my colleagues here to jump in because there's a million other things I could sit here and talk about, but I want to get all three aspects because we do come from different, I'm kind of that biomedical, biotech, pharma person. And then these guys come from everything from veterinary to Nsf crazy stuff. And so I want to give everybody that chance, but I bet we're all going to have the same answer on this one. So Sarah, I'm looking at you because I know you'll have a great answer.
So I agree completely. We have done now, as with everyone who wants more money, we all try to access programming that is the direction in which the money flows. And as resources get tighter, the Department of Energy, NSF, NIH, they've all put just an unbelievable amount of money into the I-Corps movement and creating very specific programming around customer discovery and finding and specifying that product market fit. And I think now across the 3 universities, we're probably in our 5th, 6th, maybe 7th year from when it really became formalized. And we all participate in each other's, which is another really sort of amazing thing about sort of the triangle that we form between us. And we have seen just a number of startup companies who go in and undertake this idea of, well, I solved this really big missing hole in the literature. And so somebody's gotta need it. Somebody's gotta want it. And because it was this gaping hole and it's very fundamental to us being able to move forward, but nobody actually wants it in practical use. And that makes it really hard to commercialize. And so we just leave a lot of it on the shelf in these programs. And hopefully Emily will go into some pretty decent details about the NSF I-Corps program at Boulder, have really helped our founders determine, one, if their idea has a good enough market that they want to do a startup, which the other group, the other question here is on founder-led movement in biotech for spinning out a startup as a graduate student. And we have had so many graduate students come in and do these I-Corps programs and spin out a company and gain traction, which previous to doing this, it took a decade or more of sort of languishing before you figured out if you had traction or didn't have traction. And I think we're probably down to 2 to 4 years, which I don't know about everybody else here, but that's spectacular to decide if in 2 to 4 years if you want to move forward and be successful and have a real chance at success. And so, I mean, I actually think that it's great to have a PhD postdoc who spins out a company and that's what they want to dedicate to do. But I think if they do it without having done some of the I-Corps training, the Steve Blank lean launchpad method, that they know what they're getting into and they know if they've got product market fit, it's risky. You dedicate your life to it. And I don't know, there's some crazy 80% or more of startups fail, right? That's a lot of time and effort to learn how not to do something. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And to kind of come at that from another angle, my background is in private market and venture investing. And I think the number one, I think investors, and you can think of investor as an investor of time, an investor of grant funding, as well as an investor of equity funding, like a VC or an angel. But to invest in a company, you want to understand the risks that the company faces, and you want that company to be aware of the risks and to mitigate those risks as best as possible. Now, we all know that in startup world, especially these earliest stages of technical development, of venture development, that there's so many risks and it's such a long pathway that it's hard to assess. But I think one of the best ways to de-risk an early stage company is by establishing that product market fit, establishing that traction, so that this idea that there are people out there that will buy it and there's proof that they will buy it. I think from this kind of founder-led movement, I think it's so exciting, the programming and resources that all 3 of our campuses have available for all of you out there running labs or studying towards a PhD, or even outside in the community, because this gives another opportunity to enter industry besides necessarily staying in academia or going into a big corporation. So like Sarah, I'm really excited about the resources and kind of the safety pads that we all give folks on university. It really is a unique opportunity to get into the startup world while mitigating a little bit of that risk. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, we've talked about ICOR, but if someone's online that doesn't know what that is, just a quick side note, both the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation sponsor a program called ICOR. And the idea, we teach it 3 times a year at Anschutz from kind of that biotech, biomedical side of things. And both Emily and Sarah can speak to the different ways that they present the same information in a nutshell. As Sarah said, it is this whole notion of market fit and customer discovery and truly learning. And one of the things that you do if you attend a session like this is that through the NIH ICOR, you're mandated to do 25 interviews of potential customers while you're in the program, which really gives you that baseline understanding of however good your idea is, does it have legs? Does it have potential? And the idea is that at the end of that initial ICOR training, you can either pivot, in other words, change your idea to be a better fit for the market. You can go with what you're doing because you've gotten all this resounding yes, or you can say, no, maybe I don't want to waste my time on this because no one wants it. And that's a really good way to get started. And I think in terms of the seeing postdoc and PhD students going into this market, I honestly think it's a good idea because we know that about 90% of PhD students are not going to go into academia. And so where's your passion? And if your passion is around this entrepreneurial part of life, then this is an outstanding opportunity to really, as Emily said as well, have that support safety net around you as you're going forward. And I think it's really huge. Something to think about. So.
Yeah, thanks, Cathy. You're reading my mind with the direction of this. I think to get to where you can actually start working on early product market fit. And this doesn't have to be with a product that you've built. In fact, we would prefer you start talking to customers, start having these conversations, start going through these programs at the earliest stages of your inventions, because more likely than not, the application in the market, the willingness to pay of a product is going to be very different than what you think it is kind of on your first pass or your first spread. We see that often. So ICOR, I'm dropping a link here for the NSF ICOR that Cathy mentioned. We host regional programming at CU Boulder. There are different universities across the country that host this regional programming. We have 2 specific programs. One is called Starting Blocks. One is called Research to Market. And these 2 function together to introduce how to talk to customers, how to best glean information about what the market wants and what gaps you can fill. Like Sarah or like Cathy mentioned, we require interviews, so going out and talking to customers. You put a lock on your tech. You don't tell them what you're doing. You don't tell them what you're building. You don't say, hey, I have this lemonade. Would you like to buy some? You're really trying to understand what they need, what they are looking for without any sort of bias towards what you're actually building. Starting Blocks happens 4 times a year for us. So there's always a program right around the corner. Our next one is coming up next month. It's a 3-hour obligation. It's all over Zoom. You learn a lot about a really common methodology across startup world called the Lean Startup methodology, and really starting to build a business around your product. But really, I think the most important kind of aspects to glean is how to go talk to people and understand what people are looking for. So Starting Blocks takes place 4 times a year. Research to Market is a bit more intensive. We've seen really, really great outcomes with technologists finding what a good application is for their technology. Very oftentimes, it is very different than what they came in thinking it was. One other thing that I love about ICOR is the mindset is very science-based. You come in with a hypothesis, you work to test that hypothesis by having these conversations, and then you step back and analyze form a new hypothesis and go out again. And then one last note on I-Corps, one of my favorite outcomes with teams that we work with is seeing a platform technology or a technology that could go into many different industries, understanding both the opportunity for an entry point in the near term. So if we develop this technology this way, we can start selling in 2 or 3 years. And a lot of people will have this great tech. And once we get into that market, we have future applications, future industries that we can help with this technology. And this entry point, this beachhead market or this first market will help us sell into these later markets. I think that those opportunities are really exciting. That's when you start seeing these companies go to the moon with this innovation. Anything else about I-Corps or customer discovery in the early stages?
You know, I will say, so we did I-Corps at CSU, and whether you do a program here at CSU or you use one of either Starting Blocks or R2M, and it's R2M at CSU as well, at CU Boulder, or you do the NIH focused I-Corps at Anschutz, we all function on the same traditional type of content that is part of the national I-Corps programming. And so you will, well, you do get different exposures to different instructors and obviously program managers, and you have a different cohort every single time. It is very dynamic. It's really engaging. It's one of my favorite things every year to be part of. It just watching the teams grow. And in fact, our last cohort, we had a return company from Colorado School of Mines. We had somebody from University of Denver. We've had folks from Anschutz. We've had folks from Boulder. And so you just get such a nice mix of different companies and different technologies, and they all feed off each other. So it is truly just a beautifully collaborative experience, but it is hard and it is a lot of work, which is, I will advocate for Emily and Starting Blocks. It's a really good introduction so that you understand what's going to be required of you to do a full R2M. And we've had people who have come back and said that they would have never been successful had they not done the program. And it's not because of us running it, it's because of what they learn, just like as a faculty member teaching, right? Your students get out of it the effort they put into it, and they really learn how to do whatever it is you need them to do. And so it's amazing to watch it happen.
I agree. It's tremendously fun. And I have seen 2 medical school projects that were human-centric to start, translate to veterinary. As one example, when they did their discovery and really figured out, oops, this would be better over here. And that's, kind of an extreme example, but it was really fun to watch both these teams come to this realization that they didn't really have a human product. They had a veterinary product, even though it could work in both. So things like that happen every single time we do this class, and it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm sure you've seen a bit of both, but like I mentioned earlier, I really love seeing how applications change and how you can reach, here's my vision for curing cancer, but maybe first I go in from this other entry point. The creativity that it takes to get to that goal, I think I-Corps really helps understand, where can I get to in 2 years? Where can I get to in 15 years? So we have a really great question in the chat about the local fundraising environment, which it's as if you queued me up perfectly because this is next on our agenda. We want to talk about how to go from, IP protection and early customer discovery through to, I think I have a first market I'm entering. I'm working on building this minimum viable product. What else do I need to do to build a business and kind of keep this moving forward? So let's talk about some programs that each of us have on campus related to kind of standing up a startup from all of these other kind of business foundational aspects. I'll talk about one program we have at CU Boulder, and then we can get into funding, which I think is fun and commonly asked theme in terms of trying to stand up a venture or stand up a small business. So I'll start with plugging our Ascent Deep Tech Accelerator on CU Boulder campus. This is an accelerator open for CU Boulder affiliates, as well as CU System and any local labs that we're affiliated with. And the goal of this accelerator is to have a place where you can continue working your full-time job teaching or studying towards a PhD, working in a lab, while also starting to build kind of your business basics as you understand the market you're going after and the product that you're going into it with. We work with Ascent teams on everything from incorporating your company to building a sales funnel to forming a fiduciary board and an advisory board to early stage fundraising considerations, things like what is a term sheet and what opportunities are there to fund my company. This takes place once a year, January through May. It's a couple hours a week of dedication, kind of in program. So it's meant to balance with everything else that you have going on, but is really a great start to kind of moving past customer discovery and into venture development. So let's start with some of that kind of, if you all have anything else to add. Cathy, I know that you have the Spark program and Reach on Anschutz campus. I also want to talk about, maybe Sarah, if you'd like to talk about this as well, the mentorship aspect of things and what people you can access as you start to build your startup. But Cathy, we'll start with you.
Okay, thanks. Yes, we do have the Spark Reach program here at the CU Innovations. And basically, this was modeled after the Stanford Spark program that Dr. Daria Mokley-Rosen actually initiated out at Stanford. And basically, the idea is to advance biomedical discoveries into treatments for patients. So it's very specific about what it does. And so the idea is to have a tremendous amount of emphasis on product development and tech transfer activities. And so if I did put a Spark Reach link in the chat box for those of you that are interested in learning a bit more about it. But I think a very key piece to know is that the Spark Reach program funds technologies or supports technologies that are within one or two key milestones of a commercial transaction or follow-on investment. What does that mean? It means you've done a lot of work up front. You've probably been through ICOR. You probably have thought about building a team. And one of the key things that we try to take folks through is understanding that just because we're a brilliant scientist doesn't mean we're a brilliant business development person or CEO even. And so really thinking about pulling that team together. And so it's a very intensive program. There is significant funding associated with that. And I just spoke with Gali Baller, B-A-L-E-R, yesterday about this. And there is going to be some reconfiguration on the Anschutz campus. We don't expect the REACH program, which was NIH funded, to be refunded again as a new competition. So they're doing some very exciting things that aren't ready to be disclosed publicly, but will be very soon, with the idea of supporting even more entrepreneurs on campus. But this program is a year-long program. And they look at products for therapeutics, medical devices, and diagnostics that are addressing unmet medical needs. So if you have something along those lines and you're interested in getting some significant funding, and I think more importantly, that significant support around your idea of how to build this out and get out the door with it, highly recommend that you investigate those Spark Reach teams and see if you might qualify for that. And so I'll stop there for now and let you guys add on because I know our time's going to get short here.
I do want to take a moment just so we have it, Emily. CSU has a number of funding sources as well. And some of the partnerships are open to all sort of community regional members. So one for CSU faculty is the Office of the Vice President for Research, the Catalyst for Innovative Partnerships, or CIP program. That's for faculty who are exploring some commercialization We do also have additional funding through the Energy Institute for commercialization as well. And then as you continue moving, I'm going to hit enter because these are all here. And you go out for community-wise to Nsf Ventures. They have now quite some deep tech opportunities, and we also partner pretty consistently with Nsf, and so there's some fee waivers for faculty who do startups and come through the tech transfer office with us to go do either the Reach Energy Accelerator, which is hard tech energy of all kinds with Nsf, as well as their regular accelerator programming. And then the Institute for Entrepreneurship here on campus also has a whole community member side. So if you are trying to learn your business fundamentals, they serve the entire community as well as CSU faculty and students. And so they are a great resource. And then finally, and I know all three universities use this, OEdit does their grant process every year, whether you are internal to the university. Ours is called the Fuel Program because we have rebranded it, but they also have an external portal as well for people who are affiliated with the university and go through their tech transfer offices, but want to go into some of the more small business funding. So within those concepts, there's a ton out there. And for any of you in the audience who really want to explore what some of those resources and funding are, contact any one of us and we can give you a big, long list. And then Emily, you're going to have to retell me what your question was.
I think for us, at Venture Partners, one of the big elements of venture development here is kind of team and talent. And that doesn't necessarily mean a first full-time hire, but really focusing on bringing in mentors that have business or industry expertise, et cetera. So I just wanted to make sure that's an opportunity that people know about as well. We place CEOs for faculty or researchers that are really interested in spinning out their technology, but do not necessarily want to be the ones to lead their company. So there is that side of things. We did also talk a little bit about opportunities to develop your skill sets and become a CEO yourself, lead that spin out process, especially in the early stages. But I think all three of us have our own respective mentor networks and some really, really giving and energetic people in our community that are able to, help you for free.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur. And so it's really amazing. There are a lot of folks that have really built successful businesses over the years and sometimes multiple businesses, and they're like just totally ready to give back. So that is one of the really nice things that is available, is that whole notion of folks who really want to see you succeed and they're willing to do the work. And then Sarah, you mentioned OEdit. And that is the Office of Economic Development and what? I always get it backwards.
Right. International trade. So,
thank you. International trade. Thank you. Yeah. So for anyone who's not heard that acronym before.
Good call on the acronyms. Yeah. So I think Sarah started laying out some of the opportunities for grant funding or non-dilutive funding that you don't have to give up a part of your company for. CU Boulder has a similar program called adVentures Challenge. You can win up to $125K for tech development as well as commercialization. What I love about a lot of these grants is you need a commercial plan in order to win them. These aren't just research grants, which is why our programming, again, is so helpful. Even if you're not planning to be the CEO of a venture-backed company, understanding your commercialization plan will help you win things like the adVentures Challenge, like the Innovation Award that Sarah mentioned, the OEdit grants that our state gives to advanced industries companies. Those are up to $250K in grant funding to really build your company. On the national level, SBIR grants and STTR grants require a commercialization plan as well. So there's a lot of money to unlock if you can prove that there's a market for this and you're impactful in industry.
And Emily, can I insert one more for you. There's one the National Science Foundation has. The phase 1 deadline is actually in just a couple weeks. They're called Nsf Convergence Grants. And those grants, the first year one is $750,000, but you're mandated to attend for 9 months the NSF training program, which is everything we do on steroids. And then the latter 3 months of that first year is spent developing your pitch. And you then present your pitch to the National Science Foundation. If you happen to win that pitch, you can get up to $5 million over the next 2 years in order to really get this thing out the door. And so we're talking some real money on some of these programs. And I think it's important to really investigate that non-dilutive funding. So, and
I will say, we live in a very blessed resource rich area, and because we're talking universities right now, right? And all of this programming for almost everything I have listed, it's free, right? The university has taken the time, the effort, the money, they've put it here for us to try to use and to support commercialization. Those who come and join us in the programming at any of our sites, you don't pay to be part of this programming. When you get to national level programming, you often pay. When you go use Nsf as a public company, you pay to access some of their programming so that you have an investment. You have your own skin in the game. And the free programming is really the university's way of saying, you do bring us dollars, you bring us grants, you bring us reputation, you change the world of academia. We're going to invest in you. And for the most part, right, we're not going to ask anything else of you except your time to make this come to fruition. On the back end with all of us in commercialization, if you make money, the university does want some of that money back to help pay for future investment, right? It's like paying it forward. You do still make money off of working with your tech transfer unit, but it's unlike everything else in life, it's a risk-free loan until you have made enough money to be able to pay some of it back. There's nowhere else in anything in my life that I can think of where people are just going to say, hey, give it your best shot. We're going to invest money in you. Yes. And time and resources to see if we can help you be successful. And if you can't, we all learn something. Then if you are, then we're going to pull some back in to help the next person. But tech transfer offices, none of us make any, and we don't make enough money to like run a commercial business. It is true investment by the university to help try to make these things happen.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sarah. That's a great point. And I think if there's one takeaway from this whole conversation this past hour, it's utilize these resources, and we are the gateways to all of those resources. So we'll be sure to drop our emails at the end of this conversation, just to have the conversation. I hope you have some notes scribbled down on programs you'd like to learn more about. But maybe to round this off in the last few minutes, and we would love any last questions in the chat from anybody who has them, but we do want to spend a couple minutes just talking about kind of life after university and some of this equity funding, dilutive funding opportunities, as you really start to pour the rocket fuel on your venture. So in the chat, we have mentioned Rockies Venture Club, Boulder Ventures. There's quite a few early stage investment entities in Colorado that are really interested in investing in Colorado local companies, which I love. With CU Boulder specifically, we have a few opportunities for those companies that are raising their first round of venture funding. The first one is a new venture fund, which is really exciting for CU Boulder. We have the Buff Venture Fund that recently raised a good amount of money to invest in CU Boulder startups specifically, which is really exciting. That's led by an ex-venture partner colleague, Sally Hatcher, as well as Mark Lupa. So they're starting to invest in these companies that are going through ICOR, going through Ascent, proving that they have product market fit and are really ready for the next step. Another program that CU Boulder offers, and I know we've had CSU startups and Anschutz startups in the past join this as well, is a pitch event called Destination Startup. Really, the goal of this is to bring more coastal capital, so coastal investors managing big old funds, out to the Intermountain West region to hear from university spinouts from CU Boulder, from our other Colorado institutions, and from other institutions across kind of our middle of the country, Western region. So that takes place every spring. I think the dates for next year are mid-February. That's a great opportunity for folks that are connected through our programming, through our universities, to start pitching to really some world-class investors across the country that are looking for the next big deep tech startup that'll take them to the moon. Any other funding sources that you all would like to shout out as we near the end of our time?
I would like to shout out that we have a number through CU Innovations, and Gali Baller is the guy to contact on that, and it's gali.baler@cuanschutz.edu. And you can reach out to me if you want to get a connection. There are some things changing. Also in the private side of life, outside of the university, keep your eyes peeled for those of you into longevity technology or technology for aging communities. Keep your eyes peeled for some upcoming news that'll be out in, I hope, in a few weeks. So there's some more significant funding coming our way. And that's the other piece to note, is that we have a lot of folks looking at Colorado now because all of our universities have been so successful, and more money is coming into our state. And I think it's always wise to stay abreast of what's happening there. So.
I would just give a final shout out to the Colorado Bioscience Association.
Yes. Oh yeah, thank you.
For anyone in life sciences, they have an extensive network. They do multiple pitch competitions throughout the year, networking with individuals you might find who would be interested in investing with you. The other thing, if you haven't noticed, we've all been talking about the fact that all of our teams go back and forth across all these campuses, and everybody has funding at their own universities. And I would encourage collaboration, because then you have double funding at each university, depending on who your collaborators are. So if there's a way and to collaborate with somebody at a different campus, that also opens up the whole world of translational medicine and collaborative science that we're finding is a huge grant push coming down out of the federal government as well. And so you get lots of opportunity by taking what may be considered a risk to work with somebody who can bring some new ideas or a diverse experience to your team to really move something forward in an innovative way. So
that's great. Yeah, what CU Boulder and CU Anschutz has a collaboration like that, a grant funding open specifically to teams that have someone at Anschutz and someone at Boulder. So like I mentioned earlier, if there's one takeaway from this past hour, it is please reach out to us if we can help with anything at all. I like to consider myself a connector and kind of a gateway to resources. So if I can't answer your question specifically, I will be sure to point you to someone who can. You all are really in a special position, being university affiliated, working on these world-changing ideas, and we just want to help. So we hope to hear from you all soon. Sarah, thanks for adding all of our emails to the chat. So find that there. You can find us on our websites as well. But thank you all so much for spending the hour with us. We really appreciate it, and we will see you next time.
All right. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Cathy. Great to chat.